Did you have another question?
Yeah, something you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, the going to the U.S. Supreme Court this week. Is this issue on corporations having free speech to donate as much as they want to campaigns, and they're much more effective than me speaking out, though. You know, you can hear the corporations, they can advertise on all the channels and all the newspapers. I can just shout here in the basement and go out on the street. So, you know, there's the difference. But the point is, there's another organization here in Cleveland called the Cleveland Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy. And they look to corporate reform, reforming corporations. In 1886, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that corporations are persons, just like you and I, under the 14th Amendment, which was used in freeing the slaves and empowering them. And that 14th Amendment has been used more to give corporations more rights than it has African Americans. And so the issue is we're calling for a reform to take away personhood from corporations, which I understand is not the issue before the Supreme Court, but just how much free speech they can have. But if you could take away their personhood or challenge that corporate reform, you could have reforms across the spectrum. Have you ever looked into that issue or supported it or whatever?
Again, I completely agree with you, and this is something discussed at length in the book. And there are some cases that may be coming up soon that might allow the Supreme Court to do just that. And that initial ruling was not so much a ruling as a misinterpretation of a ruling, which needs to be undone. And you know, on the plus side, it is true that the corporations can put their messages all over the media, and you can't, and even a bunch of us united can't. And it is important that you recognize, and that more and more people recognize that that's not because the right-wingers are wittier or pithier or more disciplined in their messaging and framing. It's because the corporate media has a financial interest in their point of view and not in ours. Nonetheless, I look in the book at the fact that the corporate media's own polling of American citizens' positions on all kinds of issues shows that a majority of us, on a surprising range of issues, disagree with the messages that we get every day from our televisions. It's absolutely remarkable the extent to which we disagree. And yet there are a couple of weaknesses there. One is that our Congress members don't hear that, don't see it on their televisions, don't know about it. The other is that we don't either. And so we think often that we're a small minority that disagrees with what everybody agrees with on television, and we don't know that our position is actually a majority, and that what we keep hearing on television is a minority point of view. There was somebody in the back somewhere.
Mine was going to be on the vote more on the Supreme Court, but they're looking into the right. And one thing they did mention, by the way, was on the radio that I heard was that I think it was ExxonMobil. If they, they would use 1% of their profit from last year, it would equal, to influence positions. It would be equal to all the money that Obama and McCain raised in their campaign. Just 1% of their profit.
Right. They were the biggest winners of our recent wars. There's no question. And it's interesting that at least in the current situation, I mean, I was talking when we were down in Kent the other day with a congressional staffer whose analysis really was that what we're going to reach, whether the Supreme Court does this dastardly deed or not, we're going to reach a point where more spending doesn't do any good, that they're saturating the airwaves with their stupid 30-second ads, and more isn't going to make much difference, and they're gonna reach the point where they stop spending more because they've saturated it, and it's not worth it for them to go out and raise another million to spend another million and so on. And I think I lost what I was trying to get at.
Saturated the airwaves.
I think the well, it'll come back to me. But what we're going to have to do is get rid of the requirement to buy those airwaves, and we're going to have to get rid of the funding. We're going to have to get rid of the funding of campaigns, but we're going to have to get rid of the expenditure of buying the airwaves. But what I was forgetting that I wanted to get to was that in that situation, I think even more than right now, what we're really seeing right now is that they're going to be developing other ways to spend money to influence the political discussion. And so we've seen in recent weeks the forging of letters from grassroots groups by energy company lobbyists. We've seen the organization of rallies and events. So ExxonMobil will fund the Heritage Foundation to conclude that this bill will create higher heating expenses and $4 a gallon gasoline, and then they'll fund a front group to go out and organize rallies of angry people who don't want the $4 a gallon gasoline, and then ExxonMobil itself will publicly support the bill, which will make the bill look even worse, of course. And this funding of astroturfing, of generating pseudo movements that then the media covers with free media, and then you have the ads in between those free stories, you know, I think we're going to see more creative ways like that for them to be spending money, all of which can be cracked down on and may, in some cases, be cracked down on more easily because the Supreme Court has not yet blocked that. Yes, veteran for peace.
This isn't a question, it's more of an observation. I noticed today that the website truthout.com, which I don't know if you're aware of that one.
Sure.
They announced on their site today that their workers are now unionized. They took a vote, and they're the first online news organization to unionize their workers. So now they're communication
by
workers.
card check.
So, you know, the point you're making about evolution of news organizations that's interesting to me. That's if unions have to start supporting or creating their own organizations to help balance the news, that's just an interesting observation. That's all.
Well, they certainly should. Of course, to my knowledge, unions have not supported Truth Out, and they should support progressive media, and they should stop supporting corporate media, and all progressive activist groups should stop taking out full-page ads in the New York Times, which is funding your enemies, right? They should be taking out ads in good publications and funding good publications and outlets of all sorts, and expanding them so that they do reach more people who don't necessarily agree. And you know, I think we should stop, you know, getting 30 seconds on Fox News and bragging about that, and buying ads in the Washington Post. I think we should support those who are on our side and build them up. I think Fox News has done us all a great favor, and blogs have done us all a great favor by demolishing this idea of objective media. Right? And there used to be in this country newspapers that were labor newspapers, and openly so. And they reported news as professionally and accurately and informatively as anybody else. But they were open about the fact that, as with every other human creation, they had a point of view. And I think it's wonderful if we demolish this imaginary wall between reporting and opinion, and get to the fact that all reporting has a point of view, even if it's the corporate point of view. And it's even more dangerous when it is the corporate point of view, because we imagine it's no point of view at all, and it's actually the God's truth. So I give Fox News some credit for that. Yeah, way in the back.
One of the major problems is we've lost our grip on what the role of the fourth estate is supposed to be. Right?
A lot of us have. At least we don't have one.
I'm not saying here. I'm
They've been
just
bought
saying
out.
that the country has lost its grip on what the objective of media is supposed to be, and that is to promote informed, objective public opinion. But the objective that you just raised is obviously the issue.
I'm not
So
convinced.
it's not necessarily right versus left news. It's objective versus ridiculous.
Well,
I don't mean to characterize Fox as being ridiculous, but when you give the ridiculous a platform to argue that they're you know, they're giving you both sides of something, like the Swift Boat veterans, for example. I went to Naval OCS in 1964, and I remember that the Swift Boat veterans were organized by Nixon to argue, you know, the irrationality of what he was doing.
I think Fox News is quite obviously ridiculous, or would be if it weren't so deadly. I think that if you're going to use the term objective to mean honest and informative and worthwhile and accurate, then, you know, fine, that's great. But if you're going to use the word objective to mean, you know, we're going to bring on the guy who wants to stay in Afghanistan for 5 more years and the guy who wants to stay in Afghanistan for 35 more years, and it's going to be a balanced debate between them, when a majority of the public wants out now,
What they've
then...
done, I don't mean to interrupt, but what they've done is they've given idiots a platform to argue the world is flat.
That's not all that they've
That's not what they're
done.
doing.
No, it's worse than
They haven't given random idiots a platform to argue that the Earth is flat. They've given very carefully selected idiots who push a point of view that is profitable to corporations that share board members with these media companies. I mean, these media outlets don't white out single payer because we don't talk about it in witty enough messages. They do so because their board shares board members with the health industry corporations, and they get ads from these corporations, and this is their financial interest. I think that, again, we're in danger, however, of slandering the American people. If you look at polling of the American people, the media is below car salesmen, it's below lawyers. I mean, the American people has not been fooled. The reason that people are tuning out and unsubscribing is because it's no good and the people know it. And not everyone can offer a lengthy analysis of it, but people are aware that it's become fluff and infotainment and propaganda, and they disagree with it, they're bored by it, they don't like it, they're offended by all of the screaming, and so I think, you know, what we create is not necessarily a reflection of what we say we want to create in polls. It's a matter of the fact that we haven't gone out and done it, and we don't have any control over our public policy. Is there anybody who hasn't yet asked a question? Yes.
Yeah,
then we'll take seconds and thirds.
you know, the progressive movement has had a terrible time gaining any traction. I'm preaching to the choir here. You know, we're all pretty well informed, but when you know you have all the 4 major television networks owned by huge corporations that really censor and put out you know, totally biased opinions all the way across the board, I think the progressive movement has to go to the FCC and have the country enforce laws on the books. They're supposed to serve the public interest. And it's very clear, anybody can make the point that they do not. Do you know anybody that's trying to do that, to bring that to Congress, to get legislation to not renew the licenses of these 4 major corporations and make, you know, hold these people's feet to the fire and work in the public interest? That's what's supposed to happen, and it does not. Does anybody?
The best organization I know of, and then anybody else feel free to chime in, but the best one I know of that you should absolutely support and join and participate in is called Free Press. And if you search for Free Press on the internet, you'll find 2 of them. freepress.net and freepress.org. I don't remember which is which, but one of them is the organization I'm talking about out of Madison, Wisconsin, that works on media reform, has a national media reform conference every year with thousands and thousands of people attending, and pushes legislation and keeps up to speed on every twist and turn and organizes people when the FCC is moved to have public hearings out around the country, organizes people to be there, and has had some serious victories. The other is the Free Press from Columbus, Ohio, that does all kinds of great work on election verification and all sorts of other issues, and publishes.
Harvey Wasserman.
Yeah, Bob.
Exactly. You guys, I'm going to see tomorrow. So support both free presses and the free press in general. Anybody else who hasn't already asked a question? Yeah, they're up here.
I'm curious if you support the work that Public Campaign is doing for clean elections. Do you see that as a good strategy to work on that? Or, as you were saying, now the corporations really are moving beyond even campaign, worrying about campaign finance reform because they're using the money to swamp us with propaganda outside of that also. But do you see that as a useful strategy?
I do, very much so, absolutely, no question. We need to be pushing that and pushing at the state level, where some states have made progress, and we may set an example that can be transferred to the national stage, and pursuing ways that we can get a little bit of a foot in the door. Can we fund elections for judges or for some category of people? We have to move in that direction. Because of the Supreme Court, it has to be optional, and therefore for the funding to be taken, it has to be enormous, and therefore we have to create free media for campaigns to take away the biggest expenditure. But yeah, we have to move in that direction. Maybe not in Congressman Kucinich's district. There's no indication that we need that sort of reform, but in every other district around the country, we need that reform.
3-minute warning on the.
Okay. If I was wondering what the
It's 3-minute warning on the battery. It says.
Okay, well, we can keep going off
I'm just
off
letting
the
you know.
camera.
If you have another
That's when
one.
the radicals start.
with with the upcoming G20
Revolution
summit
won't
in
keep
Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
if you could just touch on your thoughts on the importance of people coming out to protest, if you think it's effective, should we go, not go, a waste of time. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's going to be a lot of activities there, and there are going to be educational events to participate in, and there are going to be protests. And I think the fact that we did it in Seattle, the fact that other nations do it, the fact that our nation is in the lead in some of the abuses being protested means that we have a responsibility, especially people who are in the general vicinity of Pittsburgh, as we are here, to be there. No question. I think that it's also important that the peace movement is being resuscitated after 6 months of coma, and that October 5th people are going to go to Washington, D.C. to protest these wars. We're going to be at 8 years in Afghanistan, and that October 17th and days around that period are going to be events in Ohio and all over the country protesting these wars. And the actions in D.C. at least are going to involve nonviolent resistance. This is going to be on a weekday. It's not going to be simply marching around on a Saturday, which also serves a good purpose, but it's going to be attempting to get as many people as possible to get in the way of the gears of this war machine. Anybody else who hasn't asked a question yet? Yes, with the green tie. Yeah.
David, my name is Steve from Congressman Kucinich's office.
Hi, Steve.
And I just want to, on his behalf, thank you for coming here and talking. I know that he wanted me to be here to represent him, and most of you know where he stands on many of the issues that were discussed, whether it's the fairness doctrine, peace, monetary reform, health reform, things of that nature. But I'm wondering if you could just sort of, maybe it's a good final question or close to final question. Where do you see the nation in the next 10, 20 years, absent some sort of, major, catastrophe or, not just, defense, but domestically? When do you think some of these progressive ideals are going to latch on? When do you think campaign finance is going to make its way through and affect the media positively or affect corporations positively in terms of making sure that people have the influence and not those entities? I'm just curious about your thoughts.
Well, I don't know if you were here for the part where I said I didn't like to be a spectator who makes predictions sort of as a matter of principle, but you know, I have to because it's demanded of me. But I without, you know, predicting exactly when we are going to get rid of the money and fix up the media and reform the structures of government in Washington, I can say that we are coming to a point where we have a very good opportunity to make huge changes, and things are almost certain to get very, very much better or worse very soon here. In part because our government has been so taken over by parties. All loyalty goes to one party or another, and one party has maintained an image of populist representation of the people, and that party has been given the Senate with a